like to talk about my undergraduate thesis work today. So research on visual working memory has shown that memory representations of individual items can be influenced by higher level gist. This raises an important question. Does this effect also occur in the visual long-term memory? And if so, how can we use modeling approach to predict the interactions between memory for individual items and gist? To investigate this, we use a sequential memory task that's designed to measure gist biases in the visual long-term memory. Here I will show you how sequential task looks like. For example, you are presented with this red clock for 1 second, followed by this green makeup compact. Then you will see another clock that is also red, but it has a slightly different shades of red than the clock you saw before. The same goes for this makeup compact and the stapler. Basically, you will see similar objects, but with like subtle color variations. And your job is to memorize the exact color of each object. So there will be 32 total objects in one study block. So it will allow us to measure the influence of the gist in the long-term memory. In the task phase, we use a continuous report task because, as most of you know, participant response won't be perfect. So by using a task like this, we can measure their memory fidelity. For example, they can report the color of this makeup compact like this if they remember it well, or they could report something like this. So according to Dr. Brady's paper in 2018, participants does integrity in the gist and items memory in the visual long-term memory. So when they do that, it results in a systematic bias towards category mean. One useful way to understand this process is through the Bayesian framework. For example, you might remember the makeup compact from earlier as having blue-greenish color but with some uncertainty. And at the same time, you also have the knowledge about the broader category that most makeup compact with yellow-greenish. And the idea is that when you are asked to report the color of this specific item, you should combine these two sources of information to produce an optimum response, which is typically biased toward the category mean. From this Bayesian framework, this type of integration reflects the adaptive nature of our memory systems in order to improve the accuracy in the long run. So that's a broader computational framework we have. Now the question is, if we measure people's memory for individual items and gist in separate tasks, can we use those measures and this framework to make a parameter-free predictions of people's performance in a different gist potential task? The first task estimates individual items memory, the second task estimates gist memory, the third task is where we predict how gist biases items memory by using task 1 and task 2 measures, plus a novel Bayesian integration model. First, I want to show you how we measure the individual items memory. So in task 1, each object appears sequentially, and participants have to memorize the exact color of each object. And there are 32 total objects in this task, which help us to capture the performance in the visual long-term memory in memorizing each individual item. After a change detection distractor, objects reappear sequentially in grayscale, and participants have to use a continuous color wheel to report the exact color they remember for each object. So now I will tell you about the computational model we use to measure individual items memory, which is the target composability computation model. To do this, I will first walk you through an example trial in a simple visual working memory task to demonstrate its prediction. First, before you see anything, your familiarity for any particular color value is at their role. Then when you see a green atom set, you have to remember your familiarity for that color increase. In this model, this familiarity boost is measured with the signal detection parameter d prime. As you can see from the shape of this familiarity gradient, the green color you actually see gets the d prime boosted. The colors that are far from green get no boost at all, but the colors that are similar to green get some boost. This reflects the core prediction of the model, which is that familiarity is a direct function of psychophysical similarity. Finally, because memory is noisy, a correlated noise accrues over this familiarity signal with time. So a highly similar color to green can sometimes exceed the target by chance. In the end, you just pick whichever color produces the maximum familiarity signal. To summarize, the TCC model integrating the principle of signal detection theory with psychophysical similarity scaling. Okay, so that's the model. Next, I will show you how the model fits data from the individual item task. So here is the average error distributions from our sequential memory task for individual items. And here is the fit of the TCC model and its d prime estimate. The best fitting D-prime value was 1.6. And we fit the model for each subject separately, and this graph is just an aggregate for visualization purpose. Okay, now let's move on to task 2, which is a sequential memory task we use to measure memory for gist in the long-term memory. In this task, each object is assigned to a base color and repeated 8 times with different shades around that base. We manipulate this by introducing the 8 color offsets, which the objects can be 4, 11, 20, or 31 degrees away from the base color. For example, red is the base color of this bag, and the bag will be presented as red pinkish or red orangish, etc. And in each study block, we also have 32 objects with only 4 unique objects presented 8 times. And after a change detection distractor, participants need to use a continuous color wheel to report the average color of each object. Now what's a model for gist? Here we propose that gist memory can be measured using the same model we use when we measure people's representations of ensembles. To clarify, ensemble processing refers to the visual system's ability to summarize groups of similar objects into a single representation. An example would be people can quickly extract the average size of multiple circles. According to prior works, ensemble processing works by pooling information across individual items and forming an average representation. Additionally, ensemble processing is probabilistic, meaning that each item and the ensemble representation being represented as a distribution of activity over the entire feature space. The takeaway here is that we assume the gist and ensemble processing reflect the same mechanism of extracting the summary statistics. So the computational model accounts for gist memory is the perceptual summation model, which was evaluated in a paper by Dr. Maria Robinson and Dr. Timothy Brady, published in Nature Human Behavior. This model is very similar to the individual items model I showed you before, except instead of maintaining the activations for each individual items, the model persists that people pull over these representations via summation to create a gist memory representation. As you can see from the example, when people encode these 3 similar items, they also automatically thumb their activations. And also this pull signal is imperfect. It gets corrupted by correlated noise after the pooling stage. When you're asked to report the average color, you are essentially just picking the visual value that shows the strongest memory signal in this noisy memory representation. So that's the model. Next, I will show you the data and its model fit. So here is the data from the gist memory task. And we estimate the D-prime for gist memory task by using the perceptual summation model. We call it D-prime gist, and the best fitting D-prime is 4.2. Here are the comparison of memory distributions from both tasks. As you can see, the ensemble, or we call the gist memory, tends to be more robust than the memory for individual items, which is reflected by the higher D-prime and lower circular standard deviation. And next, so now I explain task 1 and task 2. Next, I will describe the task we use to measure gist bias memory. So this task is likely like the one I previewed at the beginning of the presentation. Importantly, each object comes from a category of same type objects which have the same color category but are presented in different hues. So all objects within a category has a base average color and the same offsets. So items will be 4, 11, 20, or 31 degree from the base average color. So within the study block, people are sequentially show 32 total objects in random order, and they have to remember their individual colors rather than the average color. And like in other experiments, they need to use a continuous color wheel to report the exact color of each unique object. So this is a very hard memory task, and it is a lot of information they need to remember, so we assume participants will exhibit a bias toward the gist. Okay, now let's move on to the results of this task. First, here are the raw data. This graph shows the overall error distributions across all offsets conditions. You can see that the distribution is centered slightly to the right of 0, indicating the potential systematic bias toward the gist. And it also shows some skew. So you can see this shift and skew more clearly if we just assume there's no bias. So we just fit the standard TCC model to it, and so people simply report on individual items memory. As you can see, the model failed to capture the error. Next, I will break this down by offsets condition. Right now, each panel shows participants' error distribution for specific offsets. You will notice that as the offsets increase, the entire distribution shifts further from 0 but towards category mean. Here you can see the circular standard deviation remains the same, but there's a systematic bias toward the gist as the individual items get closer to the gist. Okay, so now let's look at the model prediction results. Now we have our D prime estimate from text 1, which measure the individual items, and I have the D prime estimate from text 2, which measure the gist. These D prime are used to calculate the weights in our model, reflecting the relative contribution of individual items and gist memory. So when we have all this, we can predict the overall error distribution in the gist bias task, which is the weighted combination of item-specific and gist-level memory representations. This flow line now comes from two separate tasks, reflecting the optimal way that participants should integrate both information to minimize error. So the strength of this model is that it can make a parameter-free predictions for the distributions of memory error, including the key features like variability, skew, and relative shifts in error distributions across different conditions. So when I put the predictions and data together, you can see from the top, when items are closer to a category mean, participants exhibit minimum bias toward category center. However, as the distance from the category mean increases, the distribution systematically shifts toward the average of the category, reflecting their increasing reliance on gist. And this is exactly what we predict. Not only that, the model also consistently outperforms other models, such as the standard TCC model in individual level comparison. It also accurately predicts the amount of biases for each offset. Additionally, the model also captures the shape, specifically the skewness for each offset. So in conclusion, this study combines the Bayesian framework, the target compressibility computation model, and ensemble processing model to generate a parameter-free predictions of gist biases by integrating the gist-based information and item-specific information. And importantly, the model can capture the key quantitative aspect, like the average bias in responses, and the qualitative aspect of the data, such as the shape and skew of the error distributions. So together, this approach provides a unified framework for understanding and predicting memory biases in the visual working memory and in the visual long-term memory tasks. So in the end, I just want to thank to the Visual Memory Lab in UC San Diego, and I especially want to thank to my co-authors, Dr. Maria Robinson and Dr. Timothy Brady. Thank you all for your time and attention.